Coming into Los Angeles, bringing in a couple of keys.
Radium Engineering fuel pulse dampener. We're going to try this. This is something that there's a little bit of a buzz going on in the Holly forums. So I decided to get one. This is kind of more for a review. And I'll go over what it does and what differences I think I probably won't see on the Mustang. But we're going to try it anyways. But what this is, it's actually pretty simple. I've never taken it apart or anything, but I can assume what's in here. You put this as close as possible to your sniper or your fuel rail or whatever you've got for your EFI setup. You want it as close to the injectors as possible to dampen the pulses of the fuel pressure. And what happens is you should have a constant pressure, but as the injectors are firing rapidly, it causes oscillations in the fuel pressure, which would be very evident in a fuel pressure gauge. And if your fuel pressure gauge is doing this, that means that there's inconsistencies in the fuel pressure. What this does is smooths that out. It's basically like a miniature reservoir. If you're a hydraulics person and you're familiar with hydraulic accumulators, that's kind of what this is. I'm assuming there's a spring in here and a diaphragm, and that will soak up the fuel pressure oscillation. In water systems, you might call it water hammer. They make those little arresters that you sometimes put in your water systems. In a hydraulic system, there'd probably be a nitrogen bladder up here that you would use as accumulator and for dampening as well in a hydraulic oil system with an HPU. So anyways, we're going to try this thing. It's neat looking. Kind of like the idea. As you know, I've always battled with this with this thing. Everything runs awesome on the car except idle. Idle is just I've tried everything to get idle better. There's a lot of things that I've done. I run a lot of timing at idle, adjusted the AFR to be pretty rich at idle just to get it to be relatively smooth. But it's still not right. I'm told, and I've talked about this before, that log heads, these 200 log heads, they just don't idle well because the air fuel distribution is crap, which is why we're going multi-port fuel injection with the new head. But until then, we continue to experiment, and that's what we're going to do here. We're going to try this and see if we can even out the fuel pressure at idle a little bit. Probably not going to fix anything. The reason I think it's probably not going to work is because I've got a lot of rubber hose about 3-4 feet from where it hardline ends to where it goes to the sniper. That rubber hose essentially does the same thing as this because that it can expand and contract. But you never know. We'll give it a shot. My other theory was putting a return style system on it might make it better, but John and Jeff on the Vintage 6 forum, both well-known members, both have return systems, and Jeff actually just got done putting a sniper on his motor, and he's also got a return system. And it didn't solve a different problem on Jeff's motor. Jeff's running an Argentinian head, I think, so he doesn't have the log head issue, I think. But he says his idle quality is pretty good. John said that even with return on his, it was no good. What Jeff is seeing with the sniper that John saw, and I am seeing, is fuel spray is hitting the lid of the air cleaner. So at idle, I don't know why that happens. I think it's probably because the injectors are a little bit large. It could be oscillation in fuel pressure as well. So we'll put this on and we'll see if it stops that from happening. So anyways, it's a pretty basic little unit. They offer it in a few different flavors. You can get it with the adapters for 6AN, 8AN. This is the part number for 6AN. It's just got O-ring adapters that it came with. You put a little bit of motor oil on here. They tell you the instructions and tighten it up. These two holes here for the mounts. Comes with the bolts for that hardware. Okay. It's in the bag right there. This is if you're boosted. We're not going to run a vacuum line on this. You can run a vacuum line on it. In an NA application like mine, you don't want to do that, so we won't be running that. Fuel pressure gauge goes here. I think I've got a spare one. I'm going to try and dig it out of my stash, and I'm just going to stick a gauge in here. If not, they give you a plug for it. It's right there. I could take the... I'm going to put this, and you'll see I'm going to put this where my fuel pressure gauge adapter is right now, but I'd rather not unscrew that and everything. I think I got a spare gauge. So let me dig that out, and we'll assemble that. Well, of course, I don't have the fittings in my stash that I thought I had, so I only have a 90, and these come with 2 male -6AN. I probably could have ordered the right one. They didn't have the option. I knew this would be a problem, but I could probably find the right one at Summit. But I want to do this just as a test, so I'm going to try and find a way to just get this plumbed in there. It's not advisable to do it the way that I'm going to do it, but it's just as a test. I'm going to just have the plumbing hold it. I'll figure out how to mount it if it works. I'm not going to go through all the trouble to mount this if it's not going to work or have any significant improvement. So I've got to figure out how to make this square peg go into this round hole over here. I'm thinking I can probably finagle the flex rubber line to make this work. So let me just kind of play around with this Tetris here. So this is what you might call less than optimum. But remember, we're doing this for science. So I didn't want to change the hose connection at all. I don't want to alter that because I got to be able to put it back, most likely. It's just kind of floating here. I had to use a 90 and a 45. It's just what I had. If I had a straight adapter, which is what I probably would use if I was installing this permanently, it might have worked better. The other thing that I might be able to do, if I take the regulator out of this, out of the sniper, because it's just deadheaded, if I was to take that out of there, I think I could probably just cap that and put this on the return side. It should, in theory, work exactly the same, but that's not how they tell you to install it, so I want to experiment with it like this. So I got it all tightened up. So I think we're probably ready to give this a try. We'll do a quick leak check on it and make sure we're all good. And I realized I didn't show the fuel pressure before, kind of before and after. Just take my word for it. It wasn't fluctuating much. What it does do, and it is an issue, and we'll fix that once we get the return tank, which if you watch the other videos about doing the multi-port on the new head, we are going to put a return style tank in this with a real external regulator. This thing will run about 65 psi cold and about 55 hot. So it's inconsistent, which is just not a good thing. The tune will make up for it. Closed loop will make up for the lower fuel pressure. But it really would benefit from being more consistent. 55 is a little on the low side too. So anyways, let's give this a shot and see what our fuel pressure looks like. Well, I went and got ahead of myself. I started it up without you guys, but leak check was good. Just fired it. See how I'm talking about the fuel pressure being a little bit on the high side, but it's rock solid. It is absolutely rock solid. So that's a good thing. Let's see how much it dips or changes with a little bit of RPM change. I'd say it's more stable. I'd say it's way more stable than it was. It's certainly not dipping. It's not dipping down like it was. So I don't know. We might have a winner here. We'll just have to wait it out and see. So we're getting close to 160 here. And the fuel pressure I'm noticing is staying a lot higher than it would be normally at this point. It's usually about at 60. It's a little high. Let's go look at it. And so here we are. It's rock solid. A little bit more rock solid than it was before. I really should hook it up the way that it was and show you. But what I am noticing is we're staying up above 60. Consistency is more important than what the fuel pressure actually is. Around 60, it looks to me like it's about 62. That's 70 there, so that's probably 62. That's a good fuel pressure. So I don't want to run it or drive it too long with it like this, but we could test it out. It's just, this will loosen up eventually hanging here like this, and we don't want that to happen. It's going to need to be permanently mounted if I decide to make this a permanent fixture. I will say the fuel pressure is way more steady. I mean, there's no change to it there. It does that when it's cold, by the way. The return to idle sucks when it's cold. Once it's warm, it's fine. I'm thinking this might be a win. Idle quality, not really any different. Didn't expect that to change. That's more a function of the head. But I'm thinking that our fuel pressure is looking a little bit better. It's certainly more consistent. So at any rate, who knows? Who knows what it was doing while you're driving. I don't have a gauge in the car. I probably will put one. Well, actually, I'm not going to need to put one in when I do the multi-port because it'll be displayed. It's going to have it inherently with the sensor. I'm going to be able to actually view it on the display, which is great. But who knows? This thing may be dumping fuel pressure, may be too high. I don't like this dead-headed system at all. We'll see the difference because we are going to put the fuel tank and the regulator in it with this motor just to see how it works with this setup. From what I can tell, it looks like it's probably operating a little bit more consistently. So you can see now that it's all warmed up. We're sitting at about 56 psi. So, it's still inconsistent. It's going to be that way with a dead-headed system, but we're not seeing fuel pressure drop now when you pop the throttle open. It's staying very consistent. So it's acting like a little accumulator, which is really very nice. So I think we want to make this a permanent install. I got to figure out how I'm going to plumb it in here, though. I don't think I'm going to be able to plumb it hard right here, even with the right adapter. I just don't want this thing hanging off of there. It's too much mass. It's going to cause something to break eventually. We don't want to do that. But I am going to figure out a way to make this a permanent fixture in here. I think that I'll put it on for now since we're not going to have the new motor for some time. But it does seem to make a difference. It's not idling any better, as you can see. It's probably kind of hard to tell in the video because it's got image stabilization, but it's definitely not changed the way that it idles. But the fuel pressure is more consistent, so that's a good thing. The other thing I actually would like to look at here, open this up and see if we're getting spray up in the air still. Let's take a look at that. See if I can't get this off of here. It does look like it's eliminated the spray to a certain extent. I'm not seeing as much coming up. Before, it would spray all over my hand, so that's also a good thing. So I think it's probably worth putting in. I am still seeing a little bit, though. I'm seeing it in the air there. I don't know if the light's catching it or not, so it might have made that a little bit better. Okay, so I need to let it cool down before I open this back up and put it back the way that it was, just because I'm going to figure out how to permanently plumb this. I am going to leave it in here. So what's the verdict with this? It's kind of what I expected and kind of not. It's not smoothing out the gauge because the gauge really wasn't all over the place before anyways. It hasn't changed the idle quality. But what it has done is, and I'll show this when I put it back to the original configuration, when you suddenly open the injectors, like when you pop the throttle open, before it would dump fuel pressure real quick because it was waiting for the regulator in the tank to catch up. So you get all that distance that the fuel pressure regulator needs to make up for, so you get a momentary fuel pressure drop. That's gone away because this acts like a little accumulator, like I talked about in the beginning. There's a spring and a diaphragm in here. And so this kind of makes up for that inconsistency in the fuel pressure. It kind of takes those bumps out of the ride as the fuel pressure regulator is doing its job. Like I said, the fact that I've got a lot of hose in here makes up for some of that stabilization that's already here. But I think that this does help. It does keep the fuel pressure a little bit more consistent. If you're running returnless, I think I probably would recommend it. So I'm going to figure out how I'm going to get this in here. Like I said, don't mount it like this. This is a terrible, terrible way to mount it. You got to have it supported. So I haven't figured out if I'm just going to kind of put it in line right here. It might be what I do. I might just stick it in line here and just have a short little piece of rubber hose here. I've got some vapor guard laying around just because it's not going to be forever. It's going to be until I do the multi-port. But I do want to get it in there. So anyways, I'll show you what it looks like once it cools down, and we'll get this swapped back to the other, just the gauge adapter without it, and I'll show you what the fuel pressure does. All right, so back to doing things backwards like we do here on the Mectrician channel. I pulled off the fuel pulse dampener. It's sitting right there. And I just plumbed it back in the way that it was. So I'll show you kind of how this thing is acting without it in there. And I think what I'm going to do, because this isn't going to be a forever install, it's not most optimum, but I think I'm going to pull the fuel line up here, and I'm probably just going to install the regulator in line. I've got some vapor guard fittings that I bought for the EFI multi-port setup that I'll just borrow for the time being. We'll get this installed in line up here probably. Don't really like that. It's not super clean, but it will work for the time being. I think it will help with the drivability a little bit. Certainly keep the fuel pressure more consistent. It makes the EFI not have to adjust so many things when the fuel pressure is more consistent. Gets you a better tune. So anyways, let's fire this thing up and I'll show you what the fuel pressure looks like. Okay, so we're back up and running. You see it's back up at 60 PSI. For whatever reason, when the regulator in the tank either gets warm or it's been on for a while, it's lower. It will drop again. Don't know why that's happening. It's just long deadhead is just not, it's just not great. So anyways, you're going to see it here. Hopefully you can see it. It's a little bit hard. I'll try and keep the camera steady. You're going to see the fuel pressure. It is fluctuating a little bit here. It's hard to see it. Probably 1 PSI, which isn't much. When you pop the throttle, it does move though. And if you'll remember in the beginning of the video, when I put the fuel pulse dampener on there, it was rock solid. It never moved. So it actually jumps up, which I find really interesting. I don't know why it's doing that. It's not much, probably insignificant. It probably doesn't matter. It's probably why Holly says that this install is just fine like this. I don't like it. But what I do see, definitely the needle is fluctuating here, and it was rock solid with the fuel pulse dampener on there. And I just don't know if it's going to show up, but let me see if I can't get in here. So I definitely like the idea of having that in here. I think it's a good idea. Certainly if your gauge is fluctuating, see, it's not consistent at all. See, it's moving. Look at how much it's moving right now. Don't know if it's catching it or not. Definitely not as consistent. So if you have a hard line and there's very little rubber hose, your gauge could be all over the place. This thing will sort that out. It'll smooth it out. Anyways, I'm going to get that permanently installed in here, or temporary permanent anyways. Well, that's a shitty install, but it'll work. I just decided I was just going to kind of splice it in right here. Just use some zip ties for now. It's not permanent, but it is good enough to go down the road for a while. I'm leaving both gauges in it just for now. So it's in there. So let's start it up and see. This short little hose here shouldn't really affect it much. If I didn't mention this before, I don't remember. You can mount it in any orientation. Their manual says you can do whatever you want with it. So I just turned the gauge over because there's just clearance here for the accumulator portion. So let's see what it looks like now. Well, this goes to show you it would have been a lot better off over here. Or having the pulse dampener over here. It's still moving a little bit over here, and it's rock solid over here. Look at how rock solid that is. So it really should be closer down here. I'm not liking the results that I'm seeing with it being just about a foot away. So, you know, unfortunately, there just isn't going to wait to mount it over here. The other thing I played with was maybe taking the fuel pressure regulator out of here and mounting it on the end here. That would probably work. But this is probably as good as it's going to get. It's probably about as far as I'm going to take it. I don't care enough about it right now. You know, we got the new motor going to go in it. We will probably install this somewhere in line with the fuel rail, probably on the pressure side over here. The return will be back there, obviously, and the fuel pressure regulator goes on the return side. So, you know, it'll probably end up over there somewhere. So we'll go ahead and we'll wrap this one up right now. Not quite the result I wanted to see with it installed where it is. It might be a little bit more stable, but I'm really not seeing much of a difference. Whereas it was rock solid, and you could see it at the beginning of the video with this down over here. So that's a little unfortunate, but you know, that's just the way that it rolls. So it just goes to show you, get that thing as close to the fuel rail as possible. Try not to have any hose in between, but it just wasn't going to work here. So now I might take back just a little bit of what I said. This is after a good long drive, and I will say the fuel pressure's staying a little bit more stable, which is interesting because I think it wasn't when I had the accumulator. I'm forgetting the name of it because, you know, my brain sucks. When I had it over here, the fuel pressure dampener, there we go. It's still rock solid over there. It's still moving a little bit here, but you know, it definitely seems better. So you know, I'm kind of on the fence about this one. I think definitely it would be good if it didn't have rubber lines on it, but and it would be better off if it was down here. But I do see some improvement here, you know. So it seems pretty happy.